Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The last couple of decades have seen enormous change in the media landscape. I saw it close up, having spent a long time working at what was then Fairfax. The arrival of the digital giants, the rise of social media, the shifts in media consumption, and the pressure on advertising, and the changes just keep on coming. I'm joined today by a guest who knows all of this very, very well. Michael Miller is the Executive Chair of News Corp Australia, which owns publications including The Australian, The Daily Telegraph, Herald Sun, Courier Mail, Adelaide Advertiser, etc. Of course, the company's interests go beyond newspapers. Affiliated businesses include REA, Foxtel, Fox Sports, HarperCollins, Sky News. The company reaches about 15 million Australians each month. News Corp is also the platinum partner of Umbrella 360, Australia's largest media and marketing conference, which is on this week in Sydney. Michael Miller, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Hi, Sean. Good to hear from you.
So how do you run a media company when the pace of change is so ferocious and relentless? How do you keep up?
The technology available now is definitely an aid. Some may say it is ever prevalent in our lives, but it definitely helps run the business. Media companies have always put their audiences first, their customers, their communities, and that the amount of data we have now is instantaneous. We can see who is reading what, where, how they're engaging, what they read prior, what they read next, and it gives you a lot of insights into not just what is trending, but what is not just driving subscribers, but driving audiences across our newsletters, our videos. So it starts off with the data, but I also apply the old techniques of nuance and calling people. I'm a constant phone caller, whether it be in the car or early in the morning. I take the calls and I make the calls because it's often important to triage what you're seeing in the data with the insights that people are seeing on the ground. So there's nothing like a good contact together with what the macro technology is telling us.
Okay, so let's talk about social media and how it interplays with journalism. And I suppose it's distribution versus journalism. Pre-social media, the content providers were also the distributors. That's changed with social media. Is the balance right yet? The balance between what social media get access to in terms of the Daily Telly or the Australian and how they distribute it and what you receive in compensation effectively?
Yeah, it's a issue that is now live in so many parts of the world. We saw the Canadian government make decisions in the past month regarding the media companies there being fairly remunerated. A lot of people have compared that to the Australian laws, which were introduced 2 years ago, and there are differences between the two. It's a must negotiate in Canada. In Australia, they haven't moved to a designation per se. Mm-hmm. But to your question around distribution, journalism needs to be discovered to grow its audience. And that we have in Australia dominant players in search, being Google, and in social, being Meta. And that we are dependent upon those particular channels to have our journalism discovered, to reach audiences, to ensure that they equally pay and fairly for the investment that we make in not just journalism, but in supporting communities and giving those without a voice, holding those to account, but also celebrating giving solutions in tougher times. So is it fairly balanced? The algorithms I'd love to know more about, but that's something which we're unable to lift the lid on. And that in some ways we're seeing those platforms also develop competing products. Ever since the laws changed in Australia, it is now a fairer playing field. They are now partners in ensuring journalism is discovered, and that the journalism which is important to their audiences is being recognised and remunerated for. More can always be done, but we're in a far better place than we were maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay, so do you think that the media organisations themselves, News Australia, for example, the Nine Network and all its affiliations, have done enough to be discoverable, to find a younger audience, to use those distribution means to grow their audience?
Again, you'd always do more, but I think we've learnt that communicating on our own channels is only part of the story. The majority, 72% of our audience now is off-platform. Recently, you've seen Threads launch. All of our 100 plus brands were on Threads within 12 hours and very active in those first 3 or 4 days in terms of communicating and galvanising to those audiences. News.com.au was one of the first to really embrace TikTok when others were questioning it. Vogue, which we had the franchise of in Australia, has a very large social media flowing on TikTok, on Insta, and on Snap. And so it's those off platforms you need to work closely with and understand how you may re-edit and repurpose and curate differently for those audiences a similar story. And that in terms of appealing to those younger audiences, I look pretty closely at the story is right. It may be curated differently, but you need to purpose it for the platform you're going to distribute it on.
Stay with me, Michael. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Michael Miller, Executive Chair of News Corp Australia. Okay, now I'd imagine news, and let's take the Daily Telegraph, would have a far bigger audience than it ever has, certainly compared to newspaper days. I would presume that's correct, Michael.
You're correct.
The economics, though, of the bigger media organisations is where it's tough, because certainly more people are looking at your content, viewing it, reading it, however, than ever before. I mean, are the big news organisations in a place where the economics, you said it's better than it was, is it sustainable for the long term?
Yep. So one of the metrics I use is, do we have a growing audience? And while you may have your knockers and your detractors and activist groups and others, wanting to disrupt, and you'd see that a lot of specialist players come in. You've mentioned the audience figure there. We reach over half Australians every month, and that's growing. And so that's ultimately, are we meeting the needs of our audiences? Yes. I think what is available now to publishers are far more revenue streams than just a cover price and an advertising stream. And in fact, I call it a client category, not an advertising category. And so many organisations, and we're not quite there yet, but meat publishing organisations have 50-50 consumer to client revenue. We're heading in that direction. We'll be there in a few years' time. That's really been aided by people's propensity to pay for streaming of content, but ability to subscribe to not just media companies now, but to your local supermarket and other regularly purchased items. And so people are prepared to pay and subscribe, and that has definitely helped the news media industry. And last year we reached 1 million paid digital subscribers, and that is one of a dozen publishers of the world that have met that market, but the highest per capita in the world. And that's been an area of I suppose, paying for that journalism. The other area in terms of client is that our clients are now not just paying for advertising, they're paying for data, particularly with the closure of cookies. The having first-party data, which a lot of publishers have. Every company now has an investment in their own content, but they don't always do it well. So agencies that we own, such as Medium Rare and Suddenly, Visual Domain and Video, are often producing content on behalf of Qantas, of David Jones, of Coles, amongst many others. E-commerce is an area that we've been big participants in recent days on Prime Day, affiliate revenues. So you've got a lot more levers to pull if you've got an audience to reach, which we do. And so the economics, while still emerging, are looking very positive in terms of how we can assist Australian businesses reach their business goals, but also ensure Australians are consuming quality and trusted content.
I have to, my background, as you know, Michael, is in journalism. I have to ask, how important is journalism in it all? And now I keep thinking of someone like Hedley Thomas, who obviously is part of the news stable at The Australian, an incredible job, the Teacher's Pet podcast. He's done video, he's writing. I mean, kind of a jack of all trades in a sense. At the heart of that, though, was just a great story. Is that something we're going to continue to see?
I think one of the levers we've pulled over the past 5 years is doubling down on purpose. And that has been a differentiator to other media companies and digital publishers that are very focused on revenue models rather than giving back to the communities that ultimately consume them. So whether it be the Grace Tame story that's told by news.com.au and the Mercury in Tasmania, when the Mercury couldn't cover her story, but let her speak, was really important in terms of changing laws in that state. Yeah, Hedley, through his podcast, what has been a no body, no parole law that's in New South Wales Parliament is critical to ensuring that the families of victims now have an avenue to pursue the truth. And so I think that's a point of difference for local media companies that focus on local stories. And that doesn't always pay. It costs a lot, but it's that giving back and making a difference, pushing those boundaries, which ultimately I think is what your reputation is based on. People buy your brand for your reputation and the impact, the positive impact that you have on many. So it is more important, I think, than ever. It's always been important, but it's our point of difference.
My final question to you, Michael. News has certainly, as has the ABC, as has the old Fairfax, kind of been considered a genre of journalism in terms of where they sit in the political spectrum, right? So that's the base case. What's the future look like, though, for these organisations and specifically for news as the world changes? Do you think media companies are as political as readers and viewers think they are, the first part of it? And do they morph over time?
I don't know that our audiences see us as being as political as both media commentators and political commentators like to amplify it. All those three companies you mentioned are essentially mass market, reach very broad spectrums through our various brands of the Australian population, and are successful due to the portfolios we run, whether it be Triple J at one extreme of the ABC or News.com or Vogue at one extreme for news, to the Australian, to 7:30 to Media Watch. And so I don't think it's a bad thing that on any particular day you've got a small handful of people at the ABC questioning news and a small handful at news questioning the ABC. But in majority, I think both organisations are doing a good job at serving their broader constituents. What we have seen around the world is more niche players emerge. They don't have big audiences, but are positioning themselves as being alternatives to the mass broadcasters and mass trusted media. And I think that's where the debate has kind of been amplified in recent years. I won't name them, but those smaller publishers that are trying to carve a niche through, positioning their bigger competitors against themselves. So that I understand their business model. I don't particularly, get enamored by it, but it's good that Australians have choice.
Michael, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Great to catch up, Sean.
That was Michael Miller, Executive Chair of News Corp Australia. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.